Now on Consciousness Matters, the president of Atheism UK, John Richards.
In these changing times, minds are changing too.
I move from time to space to matter to life to consciousness.
If consciousness is just a matter of information processing in the brain,
it's got to be. The
which is on very firm ground if that's your supposition. And so,
Yes.
so which is to say that the first person side of it, the feeling of it, the qualia of it, it isn't doing anything.
Yes.
Please accept this, where is she, token of our esteem.
Because consciousness is difficult. I've said on stage numerous times, and people think I'm joking, that I do physics because it's easy.
So what is consciousness doing?
Quite. What's it doing? What's it for? To quote Monty Python on this kind of conversation, my brain hurts. I can't think my way through that. I doubt that anybody else can, but that's no comfort.
My lovely assistant. I'm going to hand him over to his old friend for a chat.
You want me to persuade you to become an atheist? They've witnessed a crime, an enacted crime.
Yeah.
And then a row of men have been put before the witnesses. Only 4 of them out of 10, something like that, got it right. I mean, for example, last week we heard about this guy who'd been imprisoned for 38 years, wrongfully. But the very fact that our legal system is that imperfect is not a good recommendation for taking the legal view of what is evidence.
I think it might be this way, but is my thought falsifiable? Can I go out and do some tests to see if it turns out that way or not?
Popper. Yes, exactly.
There's a lot in humanism that I like, but I've come to the view that consciousness is the immaterial.
Sum total of consciousness is a ridiculous concept.
I experience, therefore I am. I tell you about that, therefore I do. And I think, therefore I'm causal. And I think the same of you. It's just, and it's not, that sounds a bit like free will, but I would say it's actually a little bit more like will. Physical world, that's a thing, that's a real thing. So am I. I'm definitely causing things to happen, and if this world doesn't have cause as a part of it, then, well, I think I've just proved spirituality. Well, good job, Matthew.
The only place causality happens is in the cosmos.
Okay.
And there's no evidence for anywhere else.
Welcome to Consciousness Matters. Atheism. Why not? Well, thank you ever so much, John, for coming onto the channel. I know that me and Robin have been to a couple of Atheism UK events, and we've been rather impressed, to be honest. You certainly have some star power in terms of the people who are able to give the presentations and things like that.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Matthew, and thank you for the compliment. Yes, I'm very proud. After the first of our tabernacle events, when my daughter made a presentation to Richard Dawkins, I thought I could die happy now.
Yes, it's and there was Lawrence Krauss as well was one of the
Yes, we've worked with him quite a lot.
Yes. Did you find it difficult to get the big names? Is there a secret to it?
It is difficult, because most of them are very protective of their contact details, because of course in social media they've been hounded, many of them. In fact, Richard Dawkins does an annual thing where he he reads to camera some of the hate emails he's had. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
I think I've seen this.
It's
actually.
well
Yes,
worth watching.
Yes.
So it is difficult, especially now, because more and more of them are getting agents. So they won't, you can't approach them except through the agent. They won't take your unagented communication.
Yeah.
And of course, once an agent is involved, they want 10%, which means that you have to pay the celebrity 100%,
Yes.
which wasn't the case. In fact, the event you're talking about, the Tabernacle one, all the celebrities worked for nothing
Wow.
in those days. 2023.
Right.
And we did pay expenses, but not all of them claimed it. So that was the world then. The world today has moved on. It's much harder to get people to do anything for nothing anymore. Even Alex O'Connor, for example, you know, the cosmic skeptic.
Yes. Might have just recently sent him an email.
Did you?
Yes.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Yes. Well, he's recently got himself a secretary
Yeah.
who now deals with all his dates and events. But I remember years ago when he was still a schoolboy, he was willing to write the foreword to one of my books for nothing. So,
John. Wow. Okay. That's something. Yeah, and 1.45 million subscribers later.
yeah, exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Well, if I had 1.45 million subscribers, I'd definitely have a secretary too.
Well, me too. Yes.
So, well, I think, speaking of subscribers, I think the way that we've ended up having this conversation is through the video that you watched that starred David Milne on consciousness matters. And I think I've been thinking about how to approach this because to be quite honest with you, I feel that I talked to David after the video and he didn't seem, how do you say? I felt like he wasn't completely happy with it in some sense. There's just a sort of sense that I'm thinking, oh gosh, how can I be better? What do I need to do here? And I've sort of been thinking about it, that maybe the best approach that I could take here is, rather than me banging my own drum per se, is to essentially sort of extend an invite and sort of say, is there a way that you could sort of talk me through to an atheist position from where I am? So rather than me trying to persuade you of where I'm at, maybe we could just do it the other way around. And, you know, how does that sound like a plan?
Sure. Yeah. You want me to persuade you to become an atheist?
Yes, you know, this is the biggest thing that's been getting in the way of me joining Atheism UK. I do mean this in a serious manner. The thing is, right, I think when you want to explore ideas and when you want to try and figure stuff out, if you go to something like a spiritual group, people will have various beliefs and ideas, and you wonder where they're anchored. You wonder where their evidence is, right? You wonder how they've proven, and sort of how do you know they're standing on solid ground. When I go to humanist and atheist events, while I don't find myself completely in agreement, I very much like the rationality and the philosophy and the science and the evidence-based approach, because I want to know that the floor that I'm standing on can bear my weight, right?
Good way of putting it. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, the word that you used most frequently there, I think, was belief.
Yes.
And that was in your title.
Yes,
Can
it
I
was.
believe in humanism, when
Yes.
you were interviewing
Exactly.
David? Yes. So I'd like to take a look at that word.
Absolutely.
Because it's got two meanings. We use it both to agree with propositions that are unchallengeable, propositions that have got a consensus of and a solid basis for adopting them as something that you can, nail your flag to the mast of. Am I mixing metaphors? Probably. You don't nail flags to masts, do you? But anyway, the other use of the word belief is for very dubious things where you are plumping. I don't know whether that word is still being used, but you are betting on a hunch that this is a worthy proposition.
So it's like saying, I believe the tyres are going to stay on the car.
Well, yes.
You're not entirely sure, but I think so. I'm going to say it is that way.
Yes, well, or I believe that the tyres will stay up.
Yes.
Yes. The Greeks had two words for belief. They had pistis, which means to have deep faith in whatever the proposition is. And they also had, doxa, which is more of an opinion, a looser background towards whatever that proposition is. And I think they were right.
Yes.
Because I think that there are inappropriate ways to use the word belief. I mean, we can say, I believe in gravity, but it doesn't make sense to disbelieve gravity.
It would be pretty crazy to disbelieve gravity.
Yes, you wouldn't last long, would you, if you tested it?
No.
So my contention is, if you can't disbelieve it, then belief in it is redundant.
Oh, I see what you're getting at.
You've got to accept it as a fact that doesn't. It pays no regard to whether you believe in it or not. You know, it's a fact, irrespective of your attitude towards it. So the other use of the word belief is how I would like to focus on as the sole reason for saying you believe something, and this is, I am choosing to have a personal attitude towards a proposition, and that is a very flaky thing. Right.
Yeah.
Now, in the title of your episode,
Yes.
you had, "Can I believe in humanism?"
Yes.
And the very fact that you put "I" in
Yes.
front of "believe"
Yeah.
affirms my proposition that it's a personal attitude.
That's a very good reason why I put I. Because I think... I didn't think it was appropriate to say we. I'm not trying to challenge humanism for everybody. What I'm trying to say is that due to the way that I've thought through these particular things about consciousness, if my thinking holds up, is that going to be compatible with humanism? That's sort of the angle that I came at it from, although that would have been a lengthy title. But it's always good to know how, when you put something down in a title, how it might be seen in another way and mean something else. So I do appreciate that.
Yes, there's two aspects, isn't there? There's transmission and reception.
Yes, I know what you mean.
You may transmit some words that you think express what you want to say, and I may hear them and interpret them entirely differently.
It reminds me of one of the things that Keith Frankish said about steel manning arguments. And he said that Daniel Dennett was a big fan of that, is what he said. He said that if you can...
Interrupting you there, a bit of name dropping.
Yeah.
We had Daniel Dennett lined up for the event that we just staged in London.
Wow.
Which was called Hitchmas. I don't think you attended that one.
No, I'm sorry to have missed it, though. That sounded quite good.
Well, we had him. What we were trying to do was reassemble the four horsemen of atheism, the new atheism.
Yeah.
And so we had. We couldn't get Sam Harris. He's got his own agenda now.
Right.
And obviously we couldn't get Christopher himself because he's sadly dead. But we had Richard Dawkins and Dan Dennett lined up, and then sadly Dan died too. So the event morphed into a more of a celebration than a reassembly of the four horsemen. Anyway, I interrupted you, sorry.
No, that's all right. It was just this idea of steel manning, and it was the sense that Dennett was saying that one of the best ways that you can argue against a position is to be able to explain the position to the person who believes it in a way that we go, yes, that's it. And then you go, and now this is how you're wrong. It sort of gives you the permission when you can say it back to someone and they go, yes, that is what I'm thinking.
Yes.
And it's just tallying in with that sense that you just gave me of that transmission and reception. Yeah.
Well, you've got to get your combatant, your person who's against what you're trying to prove,
Yes.
you've got to get their permission to engage. And by rewording their view of the argument, then you're doing that. You're breaking that barrier.
Yeah.
Going back to your title,
Yes.
Can I Believe in Humanism? The next word, first of all, I want to state that my position is you should only use the word belief for things that are dubious. That's the first, because if they're not dubious, like gravity,
Yeah.
you don't need to believe them, because it would be stupid to disbelieve them.
Yes.
So your belief is redundant, irrelevant.
I sort of see. I don't want to sort of take you out, to interrupt you mid-flow there. But there's, I suppose, the way that I see belief is sort of as a spectrum, as if it was something that sort of had a sort of scalar value to it. You know what I mean? Like you could just sort of put a number on it.
Range.
And then when you crossed a certain threshold, we say, well, we just don't even need to talk about this as a belief anymore. Your belief in this is so strong that we can just sort of take it as fact.
Well, that's right. Well,
Yeah.
I agree with that view, because I like to think of belief as something that should require consideration. Okay?
Yes. Yes. Rather than faith. Thoughtfulness.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And if you're not doing that, then you're doing it wrong. You're just accepting
Yeah.
something which might be contentious.
Yes.
So I think you should be examining, and you used the word evidence earlier,
Yeah.
and that's where you should set your spectrum,
Yes.
your limit, your threshold
Yeah.
of whether to believe or not.
Well, that makes a
So
lot of
now we
sense.
need to talk about what evidence is. And I want to get back to what humanism is in a minute too.
Absolutely.
So what should we deal with first?
Evidence sounds good.
Okay, right. So there are two schools of thought about what constitutes evidence. There's the legal school of thought,
Right. Yes.
right? And I had a conversation with Guy Otten, who we all know,
Yes.
about this, which is in the form of a video chat that you can see. I'm not sure whether it's on the Atheism UK channel or whether it might be on my personal, might be on both, because I also have my Free Thought Productions channel as well. But that conversation, because he's a retired lawyer, and that conversation was about his understanding of the word evidence and my understanding as a retired science teacher of the word evidence.
Yeah.
And his understanding is the normal legal understanding, which is anything that counts in favor of one side or other of the proposition
Yes.
can be considered to be evidence, right?
Yes.
No, I don't think that's true.
Is that because it's qualitative rather than quantitative?
Yes, that's right, exactly. So coming from my position, I do not accept witness statements, which courts sometimes reluctantly
Yeah.
do accept. They don't weight them necessarily so hard or so highly as, for example, a smoking gun.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Or a cartridge, a
Yes.
spent cartridge, but they do consider people's testimony. No, I don't, because I think it's unreliable,
Yes.
whereas a spent cartridge isn't.
Right. Yeah. I'm fairly sure I've heard that eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable.
Well, yes, there's two sorts. There's hearsay, which the so-called witness wasn't even there. That person has been told
Yeah.
about the incident
Right.
by
Yes.
somebody else.
Yes.
Maybe by a chain of people, perhaps going back thousands of years. And that's the nature of the evidence, for example, for Jesus and the Gospels.
Sure.
Just hearsay. It wouldn't get much time in court. But the other sort of witness type of evidence is eyewitness, and this is a person who was present for whatever the incident was. And as you say, it's notoriously unreliable. For a start, the police are trained to be good eyewitnesses, and what they are trained to do is to write down immediately whatever happened before they start forgetting it or mixing it up with other things in their mind.
Yes.
Now, your average eyewitness doesn't do that. They're not trained to be police. And so it does get mixed up with other events in their mind, and their memories gradually fail. And so a friend of mine is a lecturer in Greenwich University.
Right. Yeah.
He studies this. His PhD was on, what do he call them? Super recognizers.
Right.
Okay? So these are people who are very good at identifying somebody, even from a small clip on a film. They can look a blurred black and white image of somebody on CCTV and say, that walk,
Right.
I know that walk, it's this person.
I knew that AI could do gait matching and things like that. I didn't realise there were people who could actually sort of do that.
Maybe you should speak to Josh Davis, this prof at Greenwich. And so he's done that. But he's also, I don't think this was him, but there's other instances of testing the veracity of eyewitnessing. The classic one is a group of students passing a netball or basketball around between them, catching it. And while this is being videoed, a man in a gorilla suit walks past. And then afterwards they are asked what happened during, and hardly any of them saw the man in the gorilla suit because they were too busy passing them. Anyway, that's the idea. And of course, other tests have been done with experimental versions of identity parades, you know? And so they've had a row of, they've witnessed a crime, an enacted crime.
Yeah.
And then a row of men have been put before the witnesses, and I forget the figures, but only 4 of them out of 10, something like that, got it right. And so yes, we're very bad witnesses. So I don't count witnessing as a useful.
I can see why not. I mean, I think this the gorilla suit attention blindness thing. I think it really puts a finger on the fact that sometimes it seems to us, or it feels to us, like we are completely in the driving seat of our human experience.
Yeah.
And I suppose it almost seems to me like that point where someone says, your fovea is just like, a thumbnail at arm's length, and that's where you see sharply. And sort of, you're like, what the? And then it sort of clicks, but you just not really thought of it before. If somebody had asked you about how you see the world, you wouldn't have said, I just sort of scan the area without really thinking about it and everything looks sharp. So that you wouldn't say, I've actually got kind of fuzzy vision at the edges and there's some funny stuff going. It's that sort of example, I think, that sort of touches on that there are things that our minds can lead us to.
Yes.
That we're not necessarily aware of.
Yes. Well, we're lucky we have very clever brains. And they're connected to inputs from sensors. Far more than the 5 supposed main senses, by the way. But it takes a while for that information to reach our brain. If you're a 2 meter tall person, there's a measurable length of time for that information to travel along your nerves.
Yes.
And
yes. It's not like wiring. It's not like electrical wiring. If I remember correctly, that sort of there's a wave of there's like an ionic wave, something like they said. Like I know I'm not talking about this exactly correctly, but I remember that it was a lot slower than like electricity moving through a cable.
It is. Yes. Yeah. So the word for how nerves transmit a message is propagation. Nothing actually moves. It's like a domino rally. Each one taps into the next one, and so the message is by action rather than by movement.
Yes.
Okay. So, and this means that the brain has to reassemble all these signals from various organs, sense organs, and it means that we all live about 300 milliseconds in the past.
Yeah.
Which isn't very convenient if you want to play cricket, for example, because you'll be hit by the cricket ball before you try to catch it.
Yes.
So luckily, our brain is a good predictor.
Yeah.
So it merges together all these different signals which arrive at different times,
Yes.
reconstructs them. Imagine having a cinema in your head, okay? And you are playing a film of reality on that screen.
Sounds a bit like our Cartesian theatre here.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
Synchronising those things, though.
Yes. And it's making up a lot of stuff because, of course, as you know, there's a blind spot in our eyes.
Right. Yes.
And you can test this.
Yeah, I've done it before.
Yes.
You see like a little X if you've got it at the right distance. And
the X in the spot on a piece of paper, move it backwards and forwards, and one of them vanishes because it's looking at its signal is arriving over your blind
This is
spot.
like that gorilla suit attention blindness thing again, isn't it? Because we're not aware of
we
a
don't
missing
see
spot.
it
Right.
because the clever brain makes up a patch to fit in with from the surrounding
Yes.
to make a full picture for us.
Yeah.
So where were we going from here?
But I think it's those different times and things being reconstructed.
So it was about whether what we see is actually reality, or what our consciousness perceives is actually reality.
Yeah.
Yes, and it isn't a perfect match for reality, but it's damned good because you can catch the cricket ball.
Yes.
You see, so
that's the evidence.
yes,
Yes. You
absolutely.
catch the cricket ball. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we've got to hand it to our brains. They're very good. But we've got to accept that we are making stuff up. It's just that the stuff is accurate.
Yeah.
I think we've got to accept that it's accurate. I think we should only consider the scientific version of evidence, which is much more specific than what is acceptable in a court of law.
Right.
And we know that courts of law are very approximate. I mean, for example, last week we heard about this guy who'd been imprisoned for 38 years wrongfully. Did you not see the news?
Just to hear that, though,
Yes.
because you sort of have to think, you have to put yourself. Well, if you start empathising with that position,
Yes.
how would you feel? How would you feel if you'd had 38 years
Yes.
behind bars and you'd not done anything wrong?
That's right. And he always protested that he was innocent. Not always, because at one stage I think he confessed. Poor guy. He's got difficulties.
Yeah.
And
And there must be quite a bit of pressure as well. It will be easier if you do this. You'll get less time if you confess.
yes.
Yeah.
But the very fact that our legal system is that imperfect is not a good recommendation for taking the legal view of what is evidence.
What a good way of arguing that. Yes, I see what you're getting at. Yeah, it's
I mean, if it was
shakier ground, isn't it? It's not quite so.
If it
you
was
could
any
make a mistake like that.
If it was any good, we wouldn't need appeal courts,
Yeah.
which we do need.
Yes.
So I'm sorry, lawyers out there. You're doing a great job, but you're not doing a perfect job. And I think that the scientific angle, the view of what constitutes evidence, and of course, the justice system is getting increasingly reliant on science. I mean, it was the fact that the DNA was wrong that got this recent sentence quashed.
Yeah.
So, but let's look at the scientific view of evidence. It's got to be multiply observable. It's got to be repeatable independently.
Yes.
And if you've passed those hurdles, then you're getting something that's actually pretty useful.
Yes.
There are bits of science that are more flaky, more soft than.
May I try reiterating your ideas back to you just to see if I'm on the same wavelength? So I think where you're coming from here is that a court of law and the evidence that we have in a court of law may be the best that we can offer in a legal situation for now until we've developed what we do further, and then maybe we can do better.
Well, that's right. Yes.
I think what you're telling me is that if we're going to build a bridge across a river and lots of lives are going to depend across driving across it, court of law evidence isn't going to be quite enough. We need an engineer who can prove things a little bit better than that. Is that where
Absolutely.
we're coming from here, right?
Absolutely, but
Fantastic.
I don't like your word proof.
No. I see exactly what you're getting at. I'm very, very happy to return to that. But shall we do that after humanism, or do you want me to? I can do this now.
Well,
Or...
it's very related to evidence. So let's
Yes.
talk about proof now.
Sure.
So you can have proof. Engineers can have proof, and you can have proof. It's mathematical.
Yeah.
It's logical,
Yes.
but it's not necessarily congruent with reality.
Yes. Now, I think this is the idea that there are frameworks of proof. If you accept the axioms of the framework, you can accept proof within that framework. Is that correct?
Yes. So I meet a lot of keen amateur philosophers, self-taught philosophers,
Right.
who think that they've proved something by their logical syllogism,
Yeah.
and they don't realize that they've only conducted an exercise in thought.
Yes.
And I'm sure that professional philosophers understand this. It's the non-conformity of logic. Logic is not necessarily conforming with the natural realm, right?
Your logical rules might not be perfectly aligned with reality, but they work well in your sandbox.
Yes, they're very good thinking tools, but thought happens inside brains,
Yes.
and it's unlimited. Only in brains can such silly thoughts as a molten clock a molten watch that Dali painted, you know?
Yes.
Or silly thoughts like Daleks or Humpty Dumpty. Those are not real things, but we
Yeah.
can conceptualize them.
Well, zombies. I like zombies because I
Yes.
sort of, there was a certain thing with rationality that, because zombies seem like something you should be afraid of. And then I thought, hang on a minute. What do you mean? Like, the reason that I need my blood to be in my arteries is because it's carrying energy to my muscles.
Yes.
How the hell does the energy get there? How do the muscles contract if there's no blood? This
Yes,
does
yes.
not make sense. And
Yes,
you're like,
yes.
well, obviously zombies are absurd then, but
Yes,
people are still terrified of them at the cinemas.
Yes,
It
yes.
doesn't stop you from being afraid of them. So there's something going on there, isn't
It's just
there?
fun, isn't it?
Yes, of course.
And I love the idea that they can only walk in a slow, jerky way, which we could run away from. So
Yes.
another fanciful notion. So I think that these philosophers, self-taught philosophers who argue that, for example, there is a God, and they produce their syllogism and it ends up with a proof,
Yeah.
they're pre-Renaissance.
Yes.
Because back in the Renaissance period, the thinkers of the time realized that thinking is not necessarily the only way to investigate and discover new information, to answer questions.
Yes.
They realized that you had to check your thoughts
Yeah.
for a match with observations. They
Yes.
invented science. They called it natural philosophy at the time, but we now call it science. And so there's two realms, effectively. There's what goes on inside here, which
Yeah.
can be very good,
Yeah.
but it's not necessarily the same as what's out there.
Yes, that makes sense.
So what we're trying to do when we think of an argument, which using devices that we've invented, like, counting and words, can come to a conclusion, and I'm using the speech bubble sign. That's not really a conclusion, that's just an inference.
Yes.
It's what we've conjectured
Yeah.
as an end point.
Yes.
We've still got all the investigation to do. We've still got to see whether that end point, and I'm going to call it an inference,
Yeah.
matches observations.
Yes.
And that only when you've got a match or a non-match, doesn't matter which, that's the only time you've arrived at a conclusion. So,
I think it might be this way, but is my thought falsifiable? Can I go out and do some tests to see if it turns out that way or not?
Popper. Yes, exactly. Yes. So So these people don't realize that however good their argument is, it's not evidence.
Yes, I think I see what you're saying here.
So in a court, an advocate makes an argument, makes a case for whatever side he's representing.
Yeah.
But in order to bolster that association of ideas, which is what an argument is, he calls upon evidence. And he wants real stuff there. He wants a footprint or a fingerprint or or DNA. And he understands that he's made his case. It's not evidence. It's an argument, and now he needs to substantiate it by producing the evidence.
Yeah.
And a lot of keen amateur philosophers don't realize that. They just argue and argue and argue and think that they are doing something.
Yeah. I suppose one of the things if you're doing academic philosophy is going through that. It's being taught in the philosophy course about the natural pitfalls and what people try and do in philosophy and hopefully how to avoid that.
Yes, well, they do. They have philosophical, what are they called? Conundrums. That's not the right word. But yes, they do have, and they are aware of them. Properly taught philosophers.
Yes.
And they know that those are difficulties which cannot be argued out to a conclusion, even a philosophical conclusion.
Yeah.
Like the, what's it called? The railway...
Oh, the trolley problem.
Yes. Anyway, humanism.
Yes, of course.
I was a humanist. I have been a humanist for many years. I'm still very supportive of humanism, but it falls into the problem of its name, because words that end in ism are usually ideologies.
Yeah.
Very often political ideologies.
Yes.
Conservatism, socialism, communism,
Absolutely.
liberalism. Yeah. These are ism words. And isms, ideologies, have principles and values. So what are the principles and values of humanism?
Well, yes, absolutely. I think to answer that as a direct question, I feel like the principles and ideologies of humanism to me, and maybe I've got this wrong, but this is just my take on it, would be that there's sort of an emphasis on science, philosophy, logic, rationality, and reason, that it's sort of almost a pushback against just faith. A sort of an appeal to engage in critical thinking. So that to me started to build that up. But to be quite frank, I'm all in on that. I wouldn't disbelieve in that.
Do you think those things qualify as principles or values? It seems to me they're just an outlook or a stance.
Well, I think you can have an outlook or a stance, but whether you desire to use it, whether you feel that stance provides value in the world, then becomes a value. You see what I mean?
Well, so I think that humanism is really a soft option for people who don't want to declare they're atheists.
I kind of feel in the humanist literature, I'm not really sure you can be a humanist unless you're an atheist. There is that sort of exclusion of, I would say, religion, spirituality, some sort of belief in the supernatural is shunned in humanism.
Yeah, sure is. Yeah. Yes. Well, I'm glad you said that, because I get invited to speak to humanists sometimes. And the first thing I do is say, put your hands up if you're not just a humanist, but you're also an atheist. They all put their hands up.
Yes.
But they're not at an atheist meeting because atheism has been denigrated, especially in America.
Right.
You can't admit to being an atheist. You couldn't, for example, run to be an elected representative on the ticket of atheism.
Yeah.
Because
I've heard
the
this.
word has been dirtied. It's been demonized. Wrongly, but that's the world we live in. So instead of coming out and saying, I'm an atheist, people go for, I'm a bit agnostic, or I'm a humanist, you know? So it seems to me to be a soft option.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
For the real thing.
Yeah. So I would say that for myself, there's a lot in humanism that I like.
Yeah.
But I've come to the view that consciousness is the immaterial. And I've got a sort of an argument and the way that I see it and sort of a perspective on it. But if we just kept it as simple as that and as a proposition, if I could demonstrate that, then I'd have a world in which there was something that didn't fit into a material category that influences the material, and it sort of gives me a grey area. Do you see what I mean? So I'm not saying that there is a God that has been talked about in ancient texts that is interfering in the world in strange and unusual ways. That's not where I'm coming at it from. I feel that I've reasoned myself to a place, possibly incorrectly, where consciousness is sort of taking on the role of the immaterial. And that might not necessarily be too much of an issue, but if you push that a little bit further, you could say that the sum total of all consciousness, without it having to be like a unified person, sort of has a loose representation of being a bit goddy. You know, it's sort of like the total collection of all the love that can be given, all the knowledge that can be had. Do you know what I mean?
Can I stop you there?
Please do.
Because sum total of consciousness is a ridiculous concept, because every brain is isolated. You can't feel my pain. I can't experience your orgasm. We are in our heads, stuck.
So all little islands.
Yes.
Yes.
You can't add us together and make a sum total.
You can't do it in a way that changes the individual.
You can think of it.
Yes.
But all you're doing there is going into the world of Humpty Dumpty.
I know it's only abstract and not actual, but does it sort of fit the bill? Is it still somewhere in that sort of fuzzy grey area for you, or is it just, you've not convinced me yet, Matthew? Where do you feel like you are?
See, when you say abstract, I think Humpty Dumpty.
Yes, no, I see what you're getting at.
So the problem that a lot of people have, and I'm not saying it's you, Matthew, you're just reflecting a view, but particularly people who have a faith, they think that thought is supreme. They think that the world of Humpty Dumpty is more important than the world of observations. So I'm going to use the word trump.
Yep.
If we were playing cards,
yes,
then thoughts would be the trump card.
Yeah.
That's not right.
No, I know what you're getting at there. If you're deluded about whether something is safe or not, you might get injured or killed from it. You know what I mean? It has serious consequences in the world. It can be demonstrated that the real world will trump your imaginary world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So those people are pre-Renaissance. They haven't got up to speed yet with the idea that observations trump thoughts rather than the other way round.
Right. Yes. I think I see where you're going there. So the thing that sort of convinces me, the thing that's really changed my perspective on consciousness and has sort of ordered that in the world for me, is the issue of causality, which is a very thorny issue. I know it is. I'm sort of aware of the Humean issues around causality. But I was sort of, it came from something really interesting that was going on. So I would say that primarily the argument that we have in philosophical circles right now regarding consciousness primarily seems to revolve around this concept of qualia.
Yes.
You might have... Right, so you might be quite familiar with this. And
Is my red the same as your red?
but it's not even necessarily just that. There's this idea that if we can take qualia and we can say, look, this is a cast iron example of something that doesn't boil down to a number. And if it doesn't boil down to a number, then not everything can. And if not everything can boil down to a number, you're kind of... You're hosed with materialism and physicalism. We've got all these properties that all are quantifiable. They all can be turned into numbers and properties. And if we've got something that doesn't fit neatly into that category, and it's real, if your sense of red is real, but it's not reducible to numbers, ooh, this is the mystery on which we sort of go, well, consciousness must be something a bit special. It must be something that doesn't quite fit into this materialist or physicalist paradigm. Right,
Well,
so I think that's where most of the conversation is.
Okay.
I'd like to think that I've gone away from that a little bit, but the thing that changed my mind most about that, or has affected my thinking, really was the talk with Keith Frankish. Because he's sort of a proper illusionist philosopher, sort of, you know, who have had a fantastic chats with. There's one that's already on the channel. There's one that's pending, where I actually saw him in person, and we've had a lot more conversations in private because I really want to push on the point where I'm not matching up with everyone else and trying to figure out what's going on there. And I started to get this sense in which you could sort of see the world and say, well, your perceptions of reality are being determined by your brain. So your sense of whether something can be quantified or not, it's coming from your brain. So if your brain hasn't evolved to give you accurate information about where quantities are, well, you're going to use that to argue against your entire paradigm of reality? I was like, oh, yeah, see, that is quite a good point, actually.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Okay,
There was that sense of conceding a little bit and going, okay.
Let me respond to that then. You said a lot there.
Yes, I did.
For a start, the idea of quantity is a human one.
Yeah.
Numbers are not real. We invented them to count sheep.
Yes.
We needed to know how many sheep.
Yes.
So the fact that we can't quantify everything yet may just mean that these qualities, we have not yet worked out the yardstick of how to number them.
Right. Yeah.
And we have, of course, in the case of red, that's a number on the spectrum. We've done
It
that
is, yes, but I think what's interesting about that is that it's our perception of it. There are some things about the perception of colour which really, really do seem to have a qualitative angle to it, like brightness.
Yes.
Very easily
And some people are
qualitative,
colourblind. So yes, it is a personal response to a signal. But my brain is hurting, by the way. But where was I going with this? The fact that we can't think of an explanation to it assumes hubristically that we should be able to.
I know what you're saying. It's not necessarily follow that we should be able to understand the world.
That is very human egocentric.
Yeah.
Why should we be able to think of an explanation for this mystery? Historically, there's been lots of mysteries that we had no explanation for, that we have subsequently explained.
Yeah.
But we haven't explained everything yet. If we had, science would stop. Job done.
Yes. I think Lord Kelvin thought that might have been the case a few hundred years ago, but didn't quite get it right.
Well, it looked like it at the beginning of the 20th century, when physics was reigning supreme. We had classical physics. All of the equations matched observations, apparently.
Just one issue of the ultraviolet catastrophe, but I'm sure that'd be enough.
Yeah, and then along came Einstein and Bohr, and the whole thing was upset again.
Yeah.
And so what these people have been doing, going back to pre-Renaissance philosophers, including Einstein and Bohr and Rutherford, and all of these other people, they've been making models. The models have been getting better
Yep.
but they're not perfect yet.
No.
They're a bit like logic, because logic is a great thinking tool, but it's not a good match for reality.
No.
Because it's too polar. We think that everything has an identity, and you're either that identity or you're not that identity. And unfortunately, for that to be true, everything has to be static. Everything isn't static. Everything is changing. You and I are getting older. The fireplace is decaying. The metal of your car is rusting.
One never steps into the same river twice.
Yes, yes. And that is true of everything in the universe. It's all changing. There is no... The conveyor belt doesn't stop.
Right.
That means that the law of identity can't be true, because for something to be the same as itself, subsequently, time has to pass, and it isn't. Even in a tiny way, it's no longer what it was before.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the only place that the law of identity is true is in here. Humpty Dumpty land. Okay?
Yeah, yeah.
And if you take another one, the law of the non-existence of the middle, what's that one called?
Yes,
you can put it in as
non-contradiction or something like that.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yes.
That
Yeah.
worked great until quantum mechanics came along, didn't it?
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So quantum mechanics is completely illogical, but it works.
I'm not sure I could say that quantum mechanics is illogical, but it's certainly profoundly counterintuitive.
Okay. So, two or three things that contradict. Here we are. Entanglement, non-locality. Those are two illogical aspects of quantum mechanics. The evidence shows that things they can't be observed for speed and position at the same time.
Right, yes.
And they can be in two different places, apparently. But this only happens when you try to look for them. So if that's not illogical, I don't know what is. But it works. The point here is that what we are trying to do in our heads is match what we see in the natural realm. And the best we can... the natural realm is mostly middle. It's not polar like the law of identity. The natural realm is mostly middle. There's a lot of range and spectrum in between the opposite ends of everything.
Yes.
Okay?
I think I see what you're getting at. Are there a couple of examples maybe that if people weren't following that abstractly, that we could sort of make that a little bit more concrete?
Well, the point is, what we're trying to do with our best thinking technique, which is logic, is construct a staircase that tries to match a slope. Reality is the slope.
Right,
But
yes.
logic only works in steps.
Is it possible that reality's actually quantizable, though?
Oh, reality is quantized.
Yeah.
But-
So it would be very, very tiny little steps.
Yes, yes.
And our steps are bigger.
Yes, and what we're trying to do is get smaller and smaller steps and closer to reality, which is what we have done when we've improved our instruments for measurement and so on.
Yes.
So, but nevertheless, we can't ever be sure that our steps are the same as the slope. It's like, did you do differentiation in maths?
Gosh, no, I didn't.
Well, it's a way of describing.
Is this the area under a curve? Or...
Yes.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
That.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. It's a way of describing a shape by increments, little steps, and that's
Right.
what we're doing in here.
You can make the steps finer and finer and finer, but it doesn't quite give the actual result of the curve.
You can never get it. You can never
Yeah.
be sure that it's perfect.
It just gets better. Yes. Yeah.
And it has got better. In the last 150 years, we've discovered a great deal more about reality.
Yes. So my sticking point then. So you remember before when I was saying that I feel like the philosophy around consciousness is wrapped up with this idea of qualia? That's been so powerful to me in the past. Keith has probably challenged it better than anybody else, but it did take quite a bit of conversation. And I can honestly say I've watched a lot of things about illusionism, but nothing was quite the same as talking to a passionate illusionist, right? Someone who is a proponent of the position, who really understood it very well.
Yes.
It wasn't quite the same, you know. There's little, oh right, yeah, no, I get it. And so the angle that I took from that point of view switched. The argument I make, and it's just 4 simple lines, is, and you might have heard them on the video with David Milne, and it was essentially to say, I experience, therefore I am. I tell you about that, therefore I do. And I think, therefore I'm causal, and I think the same of you. You know, it's just, and it's not, that sounds a bit like free will, but I would say it's actually a little bit more like will. I'm not necessarily saying that we get like a magical choice of many options. I'm not necessarily saying that, but what I am saying is that somehow we are playing a causal role in the world. And the problem that I have is that this just doesn't make any sense to me in a material or a physical framework. And the reason for that is that my understanding of the material or physical framework is that I break down into fundamental particles if you just zoom in enough, right? You know, even the atoms aren't small enough. You know, we've got to talk about quarks, you know, and how many? There's 17 particles in the standard model of particle physics.
Model.
Well, that's it.
Model.
Yes, absolutely.
And it might be wrong.
It may well be wrong, but this is exactly why we're having the conversation, because this concept of saying, and you know, if I wanted to be a bit like, I do want to try to stay in the good faith area, but if I wanted to be a little bit provocative, I might say, you think everything is made out of tiny balls. Do you know what I mean? There's this sense in which we can see the world as strange in that regard. But the thing, I don't have a problem with things being made of atoms, but what I do have an issue with is, how do we then explain human beings as causing things to happen? Because it would seem to me that physics is descriptive. It has no prescriptive power. Physics being descriptive reduces it to, well, stuff's just there. It's happening. Why? I'm not even sure we can ask that question. I'm not even sure it makes any sense.
Indeed.
What causes things?
Yes.
I'm not sure that's a good question. But
there's work to do. It's a job in progress.
But how do you square those things? Because there's one thing saying, there's part of my mind saying, Matthew, we've done it. We figured out we are absolutely 100% causing things to happen. And then I go, all right, how do I explain this with atoms? And I'm like, you don't really. And I said this to one of, we were doing I was filming a talk for Premier Unbelievable because Philip had asked me if we could do this, Philip Goff. It was with 2 physicists, and he was hosting it. On the way of transporting all the gear, you know, into and out of the venue, we had a couple of helpers that Philip had very kindly sort of brought in so that we could get everything working. And one of them sort of started asking me about where I was, and I was like, well, I gave them the 4 lines, and then I said, well, materialism or physicalism, it doesn't really have any causation, does it? So, and she was like, oh yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, there's something definitely missing there, and you've sort of described it with consciousness. So I can't help it. I feel like I'm in a place now where I'm like, well, okay, well, physical world, yeah, no, that's a thing. That's a real thing. So am I. I'm definitely causing things to happen, and if this world doesn't have cause as a part of it, then, well, I think I've just proved spirituality. Well, good job, Matthew. You know what I mean?
Well, there are layers. There's a tiny world, there's a world we live in, and there's the macro world of the cosmos.
Right, absolutely.
And different rules apply in the different layers.
Would it not be fair to say, though, that even though different rules apply, those different rules really are coming from the way that we package up the different layers.
Yeah, sure.
So that if we are talking about the stuff that goes on, say in the brain, and you're talking about biochemistry and all sorts of things that are going on, that there isn't anything really going on there in the way that we normally think about that doesn't really reduce all the way down the stack into those fundamental particles, essentially being.
No, well, this is the fallacy of composition.
Oh.
You know, you can get bricks with holes in.
Yes.
3 holes commonly.
Yeah.
And you can build walls with them.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean the wall's got a hole in it?
It certainly doesn't.
So the properties of items do not necessarily match the properties of a whole assemblage.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
That's the fallacy of composition. And so you said a lot again that I would like to rewind and pick up on.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Materialism is the best explanation we've got. It hasn't been falsified in Popperian terms.
Okay.
Just because we can think of an alternative, the supernatural, doesn't mean it happens. It doesn't mean it's real.
Yes.
And let me tell you, this may be a shock, but Spider-Man isn't real.
Yeah.
I mean, thanks, Robin. Just because New York, where the film was shot, exists, doesn't mean that he actually exists.
Yeah.
So, but that doesn't stop us conceptualizing him, because what goes on in here is entirely different and unrestricted from what is happening out there. So we have Humpty Dumpty world in here,
Yeah.
but out there, there's no Humpty Dumpty.
All right. I think you've answered your own question there, because the wall doesn't really exist except for in Humpty Dumpty land, right? The wall is a concept. It doesn't really exist. What really exists is those fundamental particles. So surely that actually invalidates that last thing as an objection, because it's, you see what I mean?
Well, the rules that apply to fundamental particles also describe what happens at the middle layer where we live.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, the thing that in my mind is that if everything really does boil down to those fundamental particles, there isn't really anything else going on. And we can look at the patterns, and so we can look at the patterns like in a mid-range of those patterns, and we can ascribe names and rules and this. And that is sort of like a low-resolution fiction.
Okay.
It's very helpful.
Yeah.
It helps us understand the world. It gives us explanations that have power and get us part of the way there.
Yeah.
You know, like when you're doing chemistry and they say, it's like this. And then next year they're like, ha-ha, it wasn't.
Yes, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes. Well, you've got to do that, because if
Absolutely.
you try teaching the truth at the beginning, you lose the interest of your pupils.
Absolutely.
I've been there
You've got
and
to
done
do it
that.
stage by stage. I'm
You've got to
completely
say,
with you.
this was how Dalton perceived materials to be represented, little balls, but then Rutherford found he could shoot neutrons through the balls, and so they aren't balls. They're not little hard balls.
This is a plum pudding model and
Yes,
things like that.
Yes,
Yeah.
That's right. So, what we're up against here is, again, the hubristic expectation that we should be able to think of a perfect resolution to this mystery.
Yeah.
And
May I put it another way round? Can we have a look at it and say materialism is a proposition? It's
Yes.
a proposition that requires proof and evidence. And what we're doing here isn't necessarily being hubristic. What we're doing is looking at our own construction in our own minds of materialism.
Yes.
And we're saying, actually, there's some problems with it.
Oh, sure. We can think of problems to it.
Yeah.
But in terms of matching the observations of the natural realm, it's never been found problematic.
Well, this is where I sort of have a kind of a point of agreement in that I mean, so I don't reject the material world. I think that would be very foolish, and I think that this is where we really do need to put a very important distinction in. The objection I have with materialism isn't it's the implied completeness right? The implied completeness. So what I mean by that...
That is the mistake. And unfortunately, scientists in the past have been guilty of making that mistake, and they've labelled things like as laws.
Yes.
That's wrong. They're not laws. The so-called laws of physics, you said it right, they're descriptive.
Yes.
They're not proscriptive. There's no punishment if they don't work
Yeah,
properly.
you can't get arrested for breaking the law of gravity.
No, exactly. Yes, but they are only models, and of course, they didn't always apply. I mean, for example, before there was any matter, and as far as we know at the moment, there was a period of time in the beginning of the universe when there was no matter. There was just energy.
Yeah.
The energy, the word that's often used is condensed into matter.
Yeah.
But before that happened, none of the laws of physics could work because they require matter.
Right. Is that sort of where we've got like this quark gluon soup kind of a thing, and it's all very hot and very dense?
Yeah.
Right. Yes. But
So,
the potential lied in it, though. At that particular point, it's just until it actually gets to that condensed state, you just don't see that behaviour. It's not that it's not there as a potential; it's just not been realised yet. Surely.
Potential smatential. You tried telling the cosmos of energy only that it's going to condense and then it will behave in a classical physics way until we realise that it's actually a quark mechanics way. So
No, I think I see what you mean there. It's if you were to go back to that early state, how could you see what it would become?
Yes. So I regret that anything in physics is described as a law.
Yes.
What we're doing there is applying legal words to real phenomena.
Right. Yeah.
And
it almost has a hint of religious.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Laws of God.
Right.
Yes.
Yes.
So what would be better would be to think of us as ants looking up at the universe, wondering how it works. Mm-hmm. That's the correct perception.
Yeah. No, I know what you're getting at with that. Yeah. I don't think I can argue with that in a sense.
Good time to stop.
Yeah. Well, it's that particular thing that you said. No, I mean, we're very small creatures in a very, very vast place. Mind-bogglingly vast. Yeah, so ants is doing us a service. You could have gone with bacteria.
Yeah.
We don't all have to do this on one day, obviously. But I find that causality thing that I've come across incredibly compelling. Mm-hmm. I can demonstrate... You see, the reason that I called it a perfect proof... This is great, actually. We're getting back to where we started from. The reason that it feels to me like a perfect proof is it's just so low in the epistemological stack. Can we game theory and imagine a world where your actions were determined by things that weren't you? Completely. There's not even a shred of any subjective control over the situation. We would just be playing it out. We might think there was something else going on.
Of course, we can imagine that. We can imagine Humpty Dumpty.
Right. So does that mean that you think the idea of a world without human agency is kind of that? It's kind of crazy, and we're not really sure how to make sense of agency, or are you sort of a skeptic of agency? Where do you sit on that position?
The only place causality happens is in the cosmos.
Okay.
And there's no evidence for anywhere else.
Well, what about when I say about my experiences? I mean, I would take it as a given that if I said I'd experienced something, that I might be wrong about the report of the experience. Perhaps if it happened like the police officer writes the stuff down right away, that you might be more inclined to believe that I've just seen a dog on the mantelpiece.
I'm sorry, your experience is not evidence. It might seem like it's evidence to you, but the reason it's not real evidence is because it can't be shared.
It's multi-observer, and independently repeatable.
Yes.
Yes. Scientific. Yeah, that is.
All the while you're experiencing things in your brain, they are indistinguishable from a dream, from an epileptic fit. As far as I'm concerned, your experience is not evidence to me because of the isolation.
But the experience that I'm having isn't what I'm using to justify the argument. It's the fact that I'm having an experience, not specifically what the experience is. Do you see what I'm saying? The differentiation here. See, I could be wrong about what I'm seeing or something like that. But, you know, even when we're doing this scientific...
So we agree that there's a dog on the mantelpiece.
Right. Yeah, no, this is great. But two observers both looked at the same thing.
Multiple, independent.
Exactly.
Yes.
But could we not do the same exercise with people having experiences? So we could go around and we could ask people if they have experiences, and if everybody could say, well, yeah, no, this is a phenomena, right?
Well, we can and we do, because you mentioned illusionism.
Yes.
And of course, whole audiences can be deceived by an illusionist.
Yes. Yeah.
But can that be tested? Can we put a camera behind the conjurer and see what he's really doing?
Yeah. No, I'm sure we can. And
Can
I'm
we
sure we would find
recreate
that the
it?
audience had been fooled.
Yes. Can we recreate it in a room where that conjurer is not present? This, you know,
Absolutely.
Science has got to have controls in investigations so that only the proposition that we wish to test is being tested and not being mixed up with some other effect.
Yes, no, that is so important because so many things have so many contributing factors that you could really make a mess of things if you're not careful in that regard.
This is why even fully tested and prescribable medicines have a little bit on the bottom of the instructions that say, if you experience any side effects that are not in this list, contact this person.
Yeah.
And that's because we're all individuals.
Well, I accept what you're saying there, but I think there's a subtle but incredibly important difference between the fact that I have an experience of something, and that might be wrong. It might be fallacious. But that doesn't rule out the possibility that I can have an experience which has some bearing that we can use for scientific evidence.
Oh, sure.
That there is something real there. And the difference, though, is that still entails me having an experience.
Sure. You can make a claim, and then I can decide whether I think it's worth investigating.
Let me put it a different way. The objection that I have to David Hume's causality is, I think his work's very good. I accept the notion that when we look out into the world, we do causality by inference. But I would say there is a very important exception to that. And the very important exception would be that when I want to cause something to happen, I can actually witness that causality. It can only come from me observing your
actions.
But I can see that I'm causing something to happen in the world, and then I can infer that other people do that too.
Yes. Because you've made the assumption that they have a brain like yours.
Right. Yes, exactly that. That sort of scientific image saying, I'm part of this, I look like this, they look like this, therefore they're like me. Yeah, absolutely. But that does grant you that causation.
We gain that realization about the age of 2. Up until then, we don't really know that other people have a brain like us.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, no.
So while we're on the subject of theory of mind, I want to point out that all religions are narratives, or they have bodies of information.
Yes.
That need to be imparted, right? And that can't happen until at the earliest about the age of 1, because prior to that, we don't have language. So you can't sell a baby under 1 your religion because they can't speak. It's as simple as that. So we are all born atheists. Atheism is our birthright. That's my message.
We could get into that another conversation. There are some points I'd like to say there, but I'm aware that we're sort of running out a little bit out of time now, so perhaps that's just a nice place to end it on, unless there's anything.
Just can I give you a second piece of evidence for that proposition?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Which is, if you look at the history of religions, they've all started in a place and spread out like a bacterial colony on a petri dish.
Yes.
They are all geographically originated by word of mouth down the generations. Human construct.
That is a very interesting argument. I think that it would be quite tricky to argue with that, especially after the conversations that we've had about eyewitnesses and things like that. I will think about that. I will go away and think about that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, John.
That's my job as president of Atheism UK.
Have you got any upcoming events or anything like that you'd like to give a mention on the channel before we close down?
We unfortunately lost an event that we were scheduling for next month in the Tabernacle. But that's another story. But yes, I'm looking to organise another event, and I think I've recently been invited to stage one in Manchester.
Fantastic.
And we'll see what we can do.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you for inviting me.
Most people think consciousness is supercalifragilisticexpialidocious.
We all have our own inner movie.
Consciousness is an amazing collection of sort of mundane tricks in the brain.
If nature's made of nothing but unconscious matter, how come we're conscious?
Consciousness is irreducibly subjective. Now that sense of being a subject, a locus of consciousness inside the head, is an illusion.